All right, well, welcome back. This is, of course, Introduction to Programming using Python. I'm still joined by Susan Ibach. I'm still Christopher Harrison. And we last left off playing around with variables, playing around with strings, but not everything.
No,
is a string.
No, we talked about how the purpose of programming is really to allow us to solve problems. And a lot of the problems that we face day to day involve numbers.
Yep.
So one of the things we need to get into is how do we start dealing with numbers inside of our code?
That's a great question. How do we start dealing with numbers inside of our code?
I'm so glad you asked.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
So let's.
It's like I knew the module that was coming.
It's like you read the agenda.
Hey, you know?
So a lot of the problems we do encounter when we're working with code do involve working with math. You might need to calculate how much you're going to pay on a mortgage. You know the total cost of a house or total cost of a car you want to purchase. You want to pay it off in 5 years or 30 years, and you need to calculate, well, what would the monthly payment be? So you can figure out if you can afford that car or that mortgage. Or maybe you're trying to figure out how much something is going to cost when you add taxes. Because that's one of those fun things, in Canada, oh my gosh, it's great fun. Different provinces have different tax levels. There's a federal tax, there's a provincial tax. Some items are taxed, some aren't. How much should I leave someone as a tip at a restaurant? How much milk do I need to use in this recipe if I double the recipe? There's so many different scenarios where math is required to solve the problem.
So there is going to be math today.
So I'm afraid there is going to be math today.
Okay.
My apologies. But I promise we'll take a nice long break after the math, a nice meal break there so that everybody can recover from the math.
Okay, excellent.
So it's very important that when we're working with our variables that we can store numbers in the variables as well as strings. And if you actually take a look at the slide here, you'll notice it just says I've got a variable called age, trying to stick with those meaningful variable names like we were talking about last module. And I've just set it to 42. Now, one of the things about this is how do you think, and I'm going to, maybe Christopher, I could hit you up for this one. How do you think Python knows that value age is a number and not a string? So if you look at the slide, what's different about that code?
No quotes.
Bingo. That is key. If you put quotes around 42, it is now a string that contains a 4 and a 2.
Yep.
But when you store a value that has no quotes around it, then if it's a numeric value, you're now basically creating a numeric variable. And you can print it out. You can store a width. You can store a height. You can do math with it. So you can multiply a width times a height. Now, a lot of the symbols you work with when you're doing math are very similar to what you normally work with. If you notice here, I could do addition and subtraction, but you might notice here that I've got, that wasn't quite what I meant to do. Sorry about that. Fix that. I meant to use the highlighter. That was my mistake. There we go.
I do that constantly.
Yeah, so you've got this asterisk symbol here between the words width and height. In programming languages, Python is no exception, most programming languages use an asterisk for multiplication, even though I know when we were learning math in school, they used the little X symbol for it. But the problem is X is a letter and it causes confusion. So we use the asterisk to indicate multiplication inside Python. You can combine addition and subtraction. Addition is just a plus symbol. Subtraction is just your standard minus symbol. You can use parentheses to indicate the order of operations in your math. So I can calculate a perimeter by taking double the width and adding that to double the height. Or I could say double the width and the height added together. I mean, it's the same end result. So I can do basic math using these different numeric values. The most common math operations you're likely to work with, you're definitely going to end up doing some addition and subtraction. Nice thing is the symbols on those haven't changed, so you already know this.
Plus, minus.
Plus, minus.
Fantastic.
Division is the same slash you're used to. Multiplication is the one that's going to confuse you. Instead, it's an asterisk, not an X. If you want something to calculate a value, you want it squared, or you want it cubed, or to the power of something. The exponent is actually asterisk, asterisk. So that's one of the more confusing ones there, is the double asterisk. So if I take 5 and I want the number value of 5 squared, then it's going to be 5 asterisk, asterisk 2 gives me the squared value of 25. So that's 5 times 5. And here is the strangest one, modulo. You're going, what on earth is modulo and what does that percent symbol mean? That does not return, and it's important to realize that it is a percent symbol, but it's not a percentage. This is not going to take a value of 0.01 and say, oh, 0.01 would be 1%, and 0.25 would be 25%. That's not what this is doing at all.
Yep.
If actually, what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to sort of flip up a little whiteboard here. I think that's the easiest way to do this. Whoops, not that slide, thank you. And if I go here and I give myself a little pen, except I don't want a red pen. I think we need a better color so we can see a little better. Nice red pen. I want you to think back to when you learned long division. And for a lot of us, this was a long time ago, and we rarely do long division anymore.
Do we have to admit how long ago it was?
No.
Okay.
I already explained I'm 29.
Okay,
So
right, yes.
it can't be that long ago that I learned long division.
Because you're 29.
That's right.
Yes.
So let's say I've got a number, I've got the number 5. And I want to, and apparently my fingers aren't as good at drawing as Christopher's, so I'm going to have to use a mouse here. So I've got the number 5, and I want to divide the number 43. I want to divide it by 5.
Okay.
And you think back to how we were taught to do this, you would say, well, 5 goes into 43 8 times.
Okay.
So we'd write the number 8 up here.
Yep.
And we go 8 times 5 equals 40, which leaves me a remainder of 3.
Okay.
Now, that remainder, if I can just get my little highlighter going, this remainder, that's what's returned by modulo.
Okay.
So modulo actually returns the remainder of a division.
I could see that being very helpful if I'm looking for like striping or if I need to do something every like 5th time. I could see that being very helpful for things like that.
Well, if you've ever been looked at a really big report, and when you look at a big report or sometimes even on an Excel spreadsheet, and you've got a lot of data displayed on the screen, have you ever noticed that sometimes some of the options for formatting your table allow you to highlight every second line? Well, the coder had to have some way of saying, how do I know I'm on the 2nd line, the 4th line, the 6th line? Modulo is a programmer's trick for detecting, do this every 2nd time, or do this every 3rd time, or do this every 4th time. Because if you do let's say you want to do something every 2nd time. Basically you say, if the modulo is 0, if modulus 2 returns a 0, so if the remainder is 0 when I divide by 2, I'm on the 2nd time, or the 4th time, or the 6th time, or the 8th time.
Yep.
I know some of you are out there going, whatever you say, Susan, I'm totally lost. Just to say, you will encounter situations. It's a programmer's trick for detecting a frequency of something, to do something every 2nd time, 3rd time. It's also a security feature that's used in a lot of number generation. Your credit cards, a lot of times use modulo behind the scenes. Employee numbers. What they'll often do is to see if a credit card number is a valid number. So you can't just type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I guess that'd be 9, 10, 1, 2, 3 as a credit card number and hope that somebody out there has that credit card number, so hey, I can buy this book with that random stranger's credit card number. What they actually do is they use a modulo and inside a formula to generate credit card numbers. So your American Express or Visa or MasterCard number, the way it's generated is they take a number, they multiply it usually by 11, and then they add 50 to it or 100 to it. So anytime they get a credit card number, they go, if I can subtract this 50 and divide it by 11, and that gives me no remainder, I know it's at least theoretically possible that's a valid credit card number. So, as I said, don't get too stressed out over it. I don't expect you to be coding things with modulo in the next 30 minutes, but I just want you to be aware that this is a function that although we don't use it a lot day to day in our lives, it comes up remarkably often in certain scenarios when you're writing code. So, that's just something to be aware of. And it's the percentage symbol is the way we do it in Python. It's one of the ones where the syntax really varies from programming language to programming language.
Yeah, sometimes it's a backslash.
Some of them have functions.
Yeah, it really just kind of depends.
So Python, we do have it. It's the percent symbol. Now, the other thing we have to remember is the rules for math haven't changed since we were in high school, or back, not necessarily high school, but since we were in school. When you're doing mathematics, there was always an order of operations. Whatever you had in parentheses would be executed first. Then anything to the power of would be executed next.
Yep.
Then multiplication and division, then addition and subtraction. These basic rules apply when you're writing formulas in your programs as well. So if you write a formula that combines addition and subtraction, multiplication, you need to remember your order of operations or you may get some unexpected results. And I don't know about you, Christopher, but when I'm in doubt and I can't remember, I actually, when in doubt, just put the parentheses in there anyway.
Yeah.
Sometimes, even though it's not required, sometimes logically the way I approach the mathematical formula is I think of it as you do this and you do this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those where I sometimes call this cute code or maybe, trivial code because everybody knows. I mean, I do remember something about my dear Aunt Sally, but that's the mnemonic multiplication, division, addition.
I didn't know that.
Yep,
so,
my dear Aunt Sally. So I remember that, but even then, it's like, okay, that's right. So this is, what I do remember, and you know what you, Susan, remember, and you know what everybody else remembers that's listening to me? Everybody remembers parentheses go first. So even if as you're typing it out, you know that the division is going to go before the subtraction or whatever it is that it happens to be, if you put parentheses around it, now what you've done is you've made it crystal clear and nobody else that's coming along and reading your code then has to remember that.
Yeah, it comes back to that idea of making a code really easy to read.
Exactly.
And so that you can remember later, and it's as easy as possible to understand your code for somebody else. So when you have a really long formula, even though it might not be required to include the parentheses, you might include it for readability. So it's easier to follow what you're doing inside your code. So it doesn't hurt to have extra parentheses. But the good news is you don't have to learn any new math rules when you're writing math inside your code. They're the same rules you learned when you were in school.
Yep.
So how do we get a computer to do our math homework? Let me bring up Visual Studio here and get Visual Studio to do some math for me. So I've created a new project, and I'm going to declare a variable. Let's see, what am I going to do math on here? Let's work on calculating the area of an object.
Okay.
So, and initially, it's just going to be equal to 0.
Okay.
Because maybe there's some cool functions I'll want to use later. So we'll start off with...
So just kind of tell it right away, hey, you're a number, kind of, all right, seed it. Yep.
Exactly. So setting up a variable, telling Python it's a number by giving it a numeric value initially. And then I maybe have a height, and our height is 10, and a width, and the width of our object, maybe it's a rectangle, and the width is 20. And then I can say that area is therefore equal to width times height. If it's a rectangle, that'll be true. Of course, if it was a triangle, I'd have to then take that result and divide it by 2. Isn't that, I think, was half base height? I'm having a real hard time. Now I'm having to remember geometry as well. This is hurting my brain. So this is the, I better put in a comment here. Calculate the area of a triangle, because otherwise everyone else is going to go, why on earth is she dividing it by 2? And then I can just print that output onto the screen.
Okay.
So if I execute my code, it goes off and it comes back with a value of 100, which is 10 times 20, 200, divided by 2, 100. So it's successfully gone off and done my math homework, and it was geometry homework, I guess, this time, and calculated a result for me.
Yep.
Now, this is where the fun starts. You're displaying a value on the screen, but sometimes you're going to want to format that output. Now, I can, so let's say instead of just printing area on the screen, I want to say the area of the triangle would be, and we saw in the last module how you could use that plus symbol to concatenate strings together.
Right, okay.
So it's used in math. It's also used to concatenate strings. So I say the area of a triangle would be, and I say specify the area, because this will make it, you just see 100 appearing on the screen. Well, what is that 100 telling me? So I want to have some context of the significance of that number. And I go and I run the code and crash and burn. Oh, that's not good.
Can't convert float object to str implicitly.
Yeah, so I get this lovely error message here. Exactly. Can't convert float object to str implicitly. Again, a very crystal clear error message. By the way, word of warning, not all error messages are going to make a whole lot of sense. In this case, though, the nice thing is I actually have an idea of what the problem is. It was mentioning something about a string. str is short for string. I mentioned the plus symbol can be used to concatenate 2 strings together, but area isn't a string. Area is a number. So now I have a problem because it won't concatenate a number to a string. That gives me an error message because the plus sign is expecting me to either add two numbers together or to concatenate two strings together. It says, what do I do with a string and a number? Okay, but I want to do this. And that's why we have the ability to do some nice formatting. Where's that? Just find my little slide, sorry about that. So one of the things you can do is you can specify in your actual print statement within the string, you can put in a placeholder for the numeric value you're planning to display. So if I specify that I have %d cats, for example, right here, a little %d symbol, I can tell that I'm basically telling Python that where you see the %d, that's going to be a decimal number. The d is actually short for decimal. So it's going to be a decimal number I'm going to display. And then after I specify the string, I specify a %sign, and then I specify the value to replace. So let's just try that as a nice simple example. So the area of a triangle would be %d, so that's a placeholder for the value. And then instead of a plus sign, because plus is used to concatenate two strings, I'm not concatenating two strings anymore. I'm actually saying, hey, the area of a triangle will be decimal value goes here, and then I have to say, oh, here's your value. And I do that by saying %area. Now when I run, hopefully I get rid of that nasty error message. Ooh, hang on, I totally messed that up apparently. That's a big, ugly, the area of a triangle can't convert float object to string implicitly. Oh, that's fun. Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to touch about that later. And I'm going to change it to be a %f instead of a %d.
Okay.
And %f just means it's a float number, not a decimal number. I'll talk about floats and decimals in a few slides, actually. But just for the sake of showing you that this logic of put in a placeholder and then say, here's the value for the placeholder works, I'm just going to change it to an f. And now you can see it says the area of a triangle be 100.000000. So
0, 0, 0.
0, 0, 0, yeah. So F just stands for float, D stands for decimal. A float is usually what we will use to hold a value which has decimal places. Typically the D is what we'll use for whole integers and just straight numeric values that don't have decimal places. And as you can see, it's very particular about what I'm passing in. So I said, and I will show you another way to get rid of that error message a little bit later, some useful tricks when you start working with numbers and start getting those kinds of big nasty things that say float should be string, string should be deck. That's part of what I want to help you solve in here is because these error messages do pop up. So I can specify that the area of a triangle will be %f, but it was really ugly seeing those 100.00000 kind of looks ugly.
0, 0?
Yeah, so one of the things you can do, if we go back to the slide, is you can see that it's possible to specify, if we sneak down to the bottom, where I have some examples using floats, you can specify the number of decimal places you want. So I can go ahead and say, all right, the triangle will be %f, 0.2. So
Okay.
I'm specifying put two decimal places, or two positions after the decimal place. So now when I display it, oh, really? I'm telling you, I'm having a great time here. It is, I've got my 0.2 in the wrong place. I did promise we would get through this entire module, this entire course without making any errors, did I not? All right, so it's 0.2f, not f.2. And now I get the output I'm actually after. So now I've got the area of a triangle would be 100.00.
You know, I have to say the format strings, and you know, you're going to keep talking about it, and I'll of course come back to this when we get into dates after we eat. But those format strings, they get me every time because it's one of those things where, you know, it's not always clear as to what it is that you're supposed to do, and it really is. It's not something that comes up every single day. It's something that comes up frequently, but it's not something that comes up often, I guess would be sort of the best way that I can describe it. And so, honestly, whenever I need a format string, I'm typically just, okay, real quick, you know, fire up Bing, let me go look up, okay, this is what I want, then copy and paste and away I go. So, yeah, it happens that format strings in particular, all the time I have to go look them up.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the nice things we've done is in that GitHub, where we've put copies of all the, we're keeping the copies of the code and the slides, there's also a Word document we created, which is every single code example from the course. So that'll be an easy place for you to go search for some sample format strings and syntax and a whole bunch of different commands. So created sort of a little reference guide for you to use when the course is over. Because, yeah, why am I struggling with this? Because I don't write these every day, and it's a really odd syntax. Of course, it's going to be %.2f.
Yep.
That's very intuitive. No, it's not. It's just, unfortunately, though, the way it works.
Yep.
So.
And
There's a lot of different examples you can play with and try it out. But yeah, don't ever hesitate to go look it up if you can't find it.
Exactly. And right along those lines, and somebody just asked this in the chat window here, how do I get a little bit of help on some of those error messages? Here's what I do. Are you ready? Copy, www.bing.com, paste. And I would say probably about 80% of the time, in that first 2 or 3 links, it will be right there of what the actual problem is. Sometimes you have to seed it just a little bit, maybe so Python space, and then whatever your error message is. But that's really the best way to figure it out. So if you see an error message, you don't know what it is, fire up search engine, type it into there, hit enter, and away you go from there.
Yeah, I guarantee you aren't the first person to hit that error message. And whoever hit that error message before you probably already went to a discussion forum and said, help, I got this error message, how do I get rid of it? And so when you do a search with the exact same error message, you'll find the conversation where somebody posted, hey, I'm getting this weird int to dec message here, how do I fix it? And underneath you may find the exact solution to the error message that you encountered. So that is something that all of us do when we see an error message, we have no idea what it is. It's a great place to start. So I just want to show some other basic examples. You can specify for the float, you could see that the default value, if you specified a float placeholder, was you would get 6 decimal places. You can specify the number of decimal places if you prefer. I do want to do an example with some decimals as well, because there's a couple of interesting syntaxes I like to play with in there as well. So this is printing formatted float value with 2 decimal places. And here's another one of those places. Not a bad idea to put in some comments, because I'm never going to remember what %.2f was later. But let's say I want to print my favorite number is 42, my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. Again, if I try and run this code as is, I'm going to get an error message because it sees a plus symbol. It either thinks I should be adding 2 numbers or concatenating 2 strings. You give it a number and a string, and it goes, I don't know what to do. What is 42 plus the letter A? So what I do is I put in a placeholder.
Don't ask me to do hexadecimal.
Yeah, %d, what is, and I specify a placeholder, and then I say the value for that placeholder is 42. So now when I run, it goes off and runs, says my favorite number is 42 successfully. In this case, it's a decimal value this time, not a float.
And the reason for that is this time around, you didn't do math with it. You just simply said 42, here's the number, and away it went. You didn't do math with it.
Yes, because I had done math with the numbers, it converted and it created a float value.
Exactly.
Good catch. Good point there, Christopher. Now, the other thing I can do is there is some syntax I can use to format that decimal number. I can specify that I would like the number to be 6 digits long, and hopefully I put it in the right place on the first try. And then what it'll do is it'll actually make 6 spaces, and the 42 appears at the end of the 6. Now, you look at that initially and go, well, that's hideous. Why would you display it that way? But there are times inside reports and things where you sort of want numbers to be right justified.
Yeah.
A lot of times with monetary values. I'll find, you $1.25, and then some values are, if you're displaying 8 different lines, and every line looks the same but has a different price, having the price always take 10 characters, so it's always pushed to the right, just looks tidy.
Easier to read, yeah.
Yeah, so it's being nice to your user. A lot of times we think of numeric numbers as being right justified, so being able to specify a fixed width for a number, regardless of how many digits it has, just can make for a nicer formatted output. Great for those of you who are detail-oriented in terms of how you display information to someone else. Another one that comes up occasionally with numbers is the ability to insert a 0. So some people prefer to show leading zeros rather than spaces when they have a fixed width. So if you just insert a 0 there, 06D, then what I get back is it takes up a total of 6 digits to display the number 42, but instead of putting spaces in front of it to fill it out to 6, it now uses zeros to fill out that extra space. So I've got some interesting options here, and I'm just going to add a little comment here. Printing the formatted decimal number with right justified to take up 6 spaces with leading zeros. So that's what that %060 is. And again, are you going to memorize this? No, you're not going to memorize this.
It's going to be a pop quiz tomorrow.
You're going to be able to look this up when you need it. I'm glad there's no pop quiz. Don't scare us.
No pop quizzes, I promise.
You had me nervous for a second there. Now, that's one way of doing formatting in Python, but we saw even in some of our first modules when we were just learning how to print things on the screen, there's often more than one way to do it. And it turns out, this was how you did in the earlier versions of Python, this was how you would format values. But in the more recent editions of Python, they've given us another way to print and format numeric values. And I just want to expose you to both the methods for a couple of reasons. One, you can use the one that you like and makes more sense to you. And the other reason is because when you're going off and doing searches and you're going, oh, how do I display a decimal number again? Some of the answers you see are going to use this format, and some of them are going to use the other format. So at least this way you've been exposed to both methods, so when you see a code example that uses one method or the other, you'll go, oh, that's right, I remember seeing this. Because you might get in the habit of doing it one way, and then one day you find a code example that does it the other way. So at least you'll have some idea of what's going on, even if you don't remember the exact syntax and have to look it up. So the other way of doing it, you still use a print statement to print a value on the screen, and you still have the concept of including a placeholder. So I specify, but my placeholder, the syntax is a little bit different. I have this placeholder 0:D. Okay, now what's nice about this is if you look at the D, 3D, 03D, F, 2F, that looks the same as it did on the previous slide.
Okay.
So I can specify it's a placeholder for a decimal. It's a placeholder for decimal, and I want a minimum width of 3 characters. And it'll fill with white space if I don't have at least 3 characters. I can specify 03D, which means I want a minimum width of 3 and lead it with zeros if it's not at least 3 digits long. I can specify it's a placeholder for a float. I can specify it's a placeholder for a float and not use the default number of decimal places, which is 6, and say I want 2 decimal places, not 6. What's different is this curly brace syntax. So instead of a %, I have curly braces. And the other thing that is also different here, if we just pick a slightly different color, is this 0 and colon, which I have everywhere.
Very similar to .NET. There's a couple of people that have mentioned, very similar to .NET there.
Yes, definitely some similarities. This is more consistent with other programming languages, which is nice because it means when you go to another programming language, you don't have to relearn it.
Exactly.
So what the 0 is indicating is if you have, when you're going to pass it the value to display. So in this case, the number 6 is actually the number I want to display on the screen. I want you to give a flashback now to the last module when Christopher was talking. And he was doing things like, let's say I had a list of values. Number 6, number 8, number 9. We were counting strings earlier. And you had the word world, or we had a word. And we were searching, and you said, oh, the letter W is in position 0. The letter 0 is in position 1. The letter R is in position 2, and the letter D is in position 3.
So counting starts with 0.
Counting starts with 0. Well, when you're specifying a string to display on the screen, you might have more than one number to show in that string. You might be showing the whole formula. The result of the calculation, width 6 times height 8, equals an area of 48. So now you have 3 different numbers you want to show in that string. So when you're using this syntax, you might have 3 numeric values you have to pass in. So if we flip back to our slide for a second here, so maybe I pass it a 6, an 8, and a 9 of the 3 numbers I want to display. 6 is in position 0, 8 is in position 1, and 9 is in position 2.
Okay.
That's where this 0 thing comes in. I'm specifying when you get the results over here, this 6, this is the first number I'm passing in. The first thing in a list is in position 0. So I'm saying take the first argument, position 0, plunk it in as this placeholder.
Okay.
Confusing syntax? Yes. But actually quite powerful because it allows me to specify as many numbers as I want. So if I had another argument, it would be curly brace 1:d.
Yep.
And the next argument would be curly brace 2:d. And that's how it accesses each of the different numeric values to include them all in the string. So a little bit different. I'll just flip over to Visual Studio and do a couple of examples with this format so you can see how it works. So, and then let's do the same thing with the .format syntax to include numbers in, numbers, almost typed bears, numbers in our output.
Hooray, bears.
Yep. And what we're going to do and apparently I'm starting to, it's a good thing we're getting close to mealtime, but typos are increasing. I think my blood sugar is dropping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print the area of the triangle would be, and remember my placeholder is different, it's going to be open curly braces, first argument, which is a float, and then instead of a percent symbol, I say .format, and I pass in the argument, the number that I want to pass in, which is going to be my first argument. That's why it's position 0, and in this case, that is the variable area. All right, let's make sure that works. So there we go. The area of the triangle would be 100.0000000.
0, 0,
Right.
0.
All my extra zeros because
Yes.
it's a nice float number there. Awesome. And if I want to do something with decimals, I would simply say my favorite number is, and my placeholder is simply open curly brace. First, I want to take the first argument. It's going to be a decimal value, colon decimal value. And let's make it I'll just make it a straight decimal in this case. And then, again, .format to say, here's the value I want to put inside that placeholder, and I'm going to put in the value 42. And then just close braces. One thing to watch out for, it's a little sneaky. You'll notice I got 2 closing brackets, one after the other.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, we're starting to nest functions inside each other, right? Because I need brackets around the 42.
Yep.
But I also opened a bracket for my print statement, and I need to close that bracket. That can kind of get you. One thing that Visual Studio does help you with on that is you'll notice if I highlight one of them, it's kind of hard to see sometimes, but it will actually, there's a slight, if I zoom in a little bit, you might be able to see there's a bit of a gray highlight on the closing brace.
It's subtle,
but it is there.
Yeah.
When you start having 4 nested functions, you might find that little subtle gray can help you, because I've literally sat there counting my opens and my closes to make sure I had them all in there.
We've all been there.
Yes, so that's just one of those fun things about being a coder. All right, so let's run this code. And now we have the same output, just chose some different formatting options, different syntax, same end result. So
Yep.
Which one do you want to use? Whichever one makes sense to you. I'm not going to force you down one path or the other. If you are confused by both and you want some, and you're going, well, if I have to choose, which one would you suggest? I would suggest using the .format. It's the more recent addition to Python, and it is more consistent with other languages. So that's going to make it easier for you if you do switch to another programming language later. So I would say, if you're going to have to do battle with one or the other, I would actually recommend .format. And I'll do one last example in Visual Studio here. I want to do one with 2 arguments, just so you can sort of see how that works.
There was actually a couple of questions about that.
Yeah, there was good stuff.
Yeah, like I'm looking, how can I format multiple numbers?
Here are 3 numbers.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to say, here's 3 numbers, and 0. The first is open curly brace, 0, first argument, and this will be a nice decimal place. The second is open curly brace. So position 1 would be the second number in the list. Remember, we count from 0, so 0, 1. So the second argument is number 1. I know it's confusing. Welcome to coding. There are a few moments. Just remember, you start counting by 0.
Yep.
And
that is pretty consistent across most languages.
Most programming languages. And let's just format this one differently, just to sort of prove that we can specify different syntax. And then the last number is going to be 2, and it's also a decimal place. And then I just do my .format, and I say my 3 values are 7, 8, 9. So I just use commas to separate the different values that I want to pass. So what's going to happen here is the number 7 is going to be used as the first argument, and we substituted here for this placeholder. The number 8 will be used to substitute this placeholder because it's in position 1, and the number 9 will substitute for this placeholder. So if we run that, you can see the first number is 7, the second is 8, and 9. And you can see how 8 is being displayed with that padded white space because I asked it to, just to show that you don't have to specify the same formatting for each of the arguments. You can play around with it, whatever looks good.
I like it.
Cool. All right. Here I'm just going to add a little comment. This is an example with multiple numbers. And that is easier to do with dot format than it is with that percent syntax. So that's the other advantage to it as well. So said, all things being equal, if you have to learn one, I would recommend dot format, but I want to expose you to both of them. So if you encounter it somewhere, you don't go, what the heck is that? I've never seen that before. You go, oh, that was that other way of formatting it. And you may decide to write it the other way. Said, it's all about choices. One way versus the other isn't necessarily wrong or right. It's mostly programming personal preference.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the time. Okay. So let's clean up. I've got rather a mess of stuff on that slide here, don't I? Let me clean up all that. Okay, so we just did a little demo showing how to format numeric values. Another thing that can come up, and actually it was starting to happen on that last command.
Yes.
Sometimes you start writing a command and it starts filling up that line, and you're starting to scroll over and scroll over and scroll over, and this starts to happen when you're doing math. And that is that the command's actually too long to fit on a line. One of the things you can do is you can use a, forward, is this forward slash, isn't it? Or is this backslash? I get my slashes mixed up.
That's a backslash.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's the one that goes this way. So you can use a backslash at the end of a line, which will basically tell Python, hey, this line continues on the next line. So for that really long command that I had in Visual Studio, which was getting really long here, you can't even fit it on the screen. What I can do is I can, now if I just put a slash here, what's going to happen, Christopher? If I put a backslash there?
It's going to think that it's a string literal?
Yeah, it's going to think that slash is actually part of the string.
Right.
So you can't, if you're just displaying a really long string and you want to do over 2 lines, that's actually not going to work particularly well for you because you have this little problem of it thinks the slash is part of your string.
Right.
It doesn't know if the slash is, no, I want to continue on the next line. But what we can do is we could go here and we could say, you know what? I actually have 2 strings.
Okay.
Here are 3 numbers. The first is 0:D, second is, and so that'll work, right? I mean, I'm just concatenating 2 strings together. Let's see if that works. Okay, so that works fine. And then what I can do is I can put the backslash here. And now it actually recognizes that, oh, wait, there's no little squigglies or anything strange happening here. So now it actually recognizes that that backslash is indicating this command is continued on the next line. So when I run, it executes as if it was 1 line of code. One very important thing I want to point out here in this code, though, and that is right here, is you have some space here. That is an indentation. That matters. If you get rid of that white space, then Python is going to get confused. That indentation of the second line is how Python points out that, oh, this is part of the previous line of code. So indenting is very significant in Python, and in this case, it's that indentation that's part of the syntax to show this is part of the previous command and not a command unto itself. So that's really important, and you need to watch out for that. Don't delete those spaces. If you do, well, then just for the sake of, hey, what if I accidentally did delete those spaces? What's going to happen? Well, hey, I take it back, and this one it worked.
It is going to work, but it really is. It's about that readability. You know, that one of the problems if we bring up the code again here, you know, that if you get rid of the tab.
Yeah. If you do that.
Yeah, I mean, if I go in and I look at that, there isn't anything that indicates to me that it's on the same line or that it's part of the previous line. But if you have that tab, that tab is sort of an indication that it's
It's associated with the previous
corresponded
line.
with the
Yeah.
prior line. Exactly. Yeah,
There-
it's about readability there.
Yeah, there are a lot of commands in Python where the indenting, if you take it out, will actually change the behavior of your code. In this case, it's being forgiving. It's saying, I'll forgive you if you get rid of it here.
Yeah.
But said there are other situations in Python where if you actually get rid of that indentation, it will actually execute a different way. Execute a different way. Awesome. So we have the ability to continue a line. We have the ability to display numbers and strings intermingled. So we're starting to get some fairly complex code here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, something else we sometimes want to do is maybe we want a user to enter some numbers.
Okay.
So I'm going to go, and this is getting to be a bit crowded on here. So I'm actually going to do something that may throw you off a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this window in Visual Studio called Solution Explorer, which you probably have open on the right-hand side of your screen. And I'm just going to go to my project, Module 4, Working with Numbers, and I'm just going to go, I'm going to say Add a New Item, because I want to add a brand new file, because this one's just getting kind of cluttered with a lot of code in it. I want to start a fresh Python file, but I want to keep all my files together because they're all about the same chapter. So I'm going to go Add New Item, and I say Add an empty Python file, thank you. This is going to be my ask user for input. Choose Add. And now I actually have two files inside my project. And I can go back and forth between them by selecting the one I want to work on inside the Solution Explorer, or once I've opened them, there'll be tabs open at the top of the screen I can use to move back and forth. So what I'd like to do is ask a user for a value. I'm going to ask, let's see, salary equals input. Please enter your salary, right? Because we learned how to use the input statement to accept values from a user. And then we're going to have a bonus that you're going to receive for the year for your amazing work this year, Christopher. You're getting a big bonus.
Woohoo!
Please enter your bonus. And this is an awesome company because you get to type in your own bonus.
Wow.
I want to work at companies like that.
I need that.
Yeah. And then I'm going to say, then I'm going to have paycheck equals, or paycheck amount equals salary plus bonus. Make sense? Right?
Uh-huh.
Your salary plus your bonus would be your total paycheck amount. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to print your paycheck amount. Oh, and I just caught myself. I almost got myself in trouble. I just noticed I have a lowercase c here and an uppercase c there. I know that Python's case sensitive, so I'm just going to copy and paste that variable name to make sure I type it the same. All right, now I run and it runs the other program.
Oh, that's not what we wanted.
That's not what I wanted. I created another file. I want to run my new file. Well, that's because when you have more than one file inside a project, there's always one which will run by default.
Doesn't know which one to run.
Yeah, it doesn't know which one to run. So it's still running the old one because it's still there. Now I can go here and I can say, start it. So I can run it by right-clicking on it, saying start without or start with debugging, and it will run my code. The other option is if you're going to be running it frequently, you can also right-click on that file and you can say set as startup file. And that'll change which one runs by default when you just press the F5 key or press the play button. I like doing that because usually I'm working on one file at a time and I just want it to run that one all the time while I'm testing. So I prefer to change the startup file option. So if we go back to Visual Studio, I right-click, I have set this as a startup file, so I right-clicked and chose Set Up Startup File. And now when I run, and I just realized I should have a space there, it'll be nicely formatted, it says, please enter your salary.
Okay.
All right, so I'm sure your salary must be at least $500, Christopher.
I think so.
And your bonus this year is going to be a whopping $75.
All right.
All right.
That's not bad.
And then it comes back and says my total paycheck amount will be $50,075.
Not for nothing. I kind of like that. I like that. That's new math. I like that math. That math worked out really well for me.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where you go, whoa, wait a second, what just happened here? How can 500 plus 75? Shouldn't that be 575? You would think.
Yes.
Right. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to try and show you what's doing. I'm actually going to try debugging. We haven't seen the debugger yet, but this is there will be times when you're going to need to see what's going on inside the code where you're going, well, why? My code ran, it didn't give me an error message, but the result's totally off. So you might want to see what's happening. One of the neat things you can do in Visual Studio is you can actually execute your code step by step. And as you go through the code, all those great variables you've set up, you can see what's inside the variables. And that's really powerful when you're trying to figure out what went wrong. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And I'm going to click in the margin here. And see that little red dot that appears in the corner? When I do that, that little red dot makes a breakpoint. So I can put it on different lines of code. I can make multiple breakpoints, and I can get rid of them just by clicking on them again. And when you put a breakpoint in the code, then you're telling Python, hey, or you're telling Visual Studio, hey, when this code runs and you get here, stop. I want to look around and see what the heck is going on. So I've got a breakpoint on the very first line of code because I don't know where it's blowing up. And I say, run. And it flashes on the screen. You're like, hey, where's my screen? Ah, there's a hint over here in the corner. Let's go scroll over a little bit here. Try not to make you dizzy. See the little yellow arrow that we've got there? That yellow arrow on the red circle indicates you're about to execute this line of code. So what the debugger has done is said, you put a breakpoint here. You told me to stop when I got here. Well, I'm here. I've stopped. What do you want to do next? Oops, I did wrong control button. So when I have that breakpoint, whoops, wrong one. Apologies. I just hit the wrong function key there for a second.
Other file.
Oh, file's running too. Okay, let's try this again. Run. Okay, so now here I am again. I'm at that first line of code it's about to execute. Now the neat thing is, when you hover over different points inside the code, it actually sort of shows you some of what's going on. It gives you like hints as to what's happening. But it hasn't executed any code yet, so there's nothing really to look at. So what I'm going to do is I want to execute the next line of code. Over here in the top right corner, you're going to see 3 buttons. Step into is the one you want to play with. Step into means execute the next line of code.
Okay.
So let's just stick with that one button. Just execute one line and go back.
Sure.
So I'm going to hit that step button, and now it executes. Oh, and of course, it's asking me for a value because,
Okay.
of course, that command was ask the user for a salary.
I make $500.
$500. I hit enter, and I'm back in the code again.
Okay.
And the little yellow arrow here has moved to the next line because it's saying, I'm about to execute this line of code. Anything you want to look at? So what's neat is I can actually hover over salary.
I'm noticing something funny there.
Yeah.
I'm noticing the single quotes. Single quotes means string.
Bingo, yes. Remember we talked earlier when we first created our first numeric variable, we said when we said age equals 42, how does it know it's a number, not a string?
Yep.
No quotes.
Right. Okay. So it's seeing that as a string. Because that's right, because input returns a string. That's where things are going wrong.
That's right. The input function returns a string. So what it ends up with is it ends up with a string value for salary, a string value for bonus, and suddenly when you say salary plus bonus, it's seeing string plus string. That means concatenate them together and you get 50,075. Oops, not what we had in mind. So we can see, thanks to the debugger, we can actually see that, oh, we have a number that's being treated like a string.
And that's not what we want.
It's not what we want. So what we need to do now is we're quickly going to go here, and we got this weird result that happened because it was basically treating it as strings. It was as if we had typed in a salary of 500 with quotes around it and a bonus of 75 and got these strange concatenated strings. So what we have to do is we have to somehow convince it that when it gets that result from the input statement to treat it as a number.
Right.
And the way we do that is there are functions that will convert from one data type to another.
Okay. And just kind of looking at that, those functions seem to match the data types that we want. So if I want an integer, I would just use int. If I want a floating, I would use float. Somebody else actually had pointed this out earlier, the str for string.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So these are functions you can use to say, take this value, or the value in this variable, convert it into an integer, please.
Yep.
Take this value, convert it into a long, which is just a bigger integer value.
Right.
Any sort of whole number if it has no decimal places. Float converts it to a number with decimals, and string will take a number and switch it into a string.
Yeah. And actually, there's a couple of people that have pointed out that when it comes to doing something like this is something you run into constantly across all
the time.
languages. Because anytime that I put together a text box box, or we're doing command line, that by default, it's going to treat it as a string.
Yes.
So that's what you've got back. Now you're going to try and do math with it. Well, now you've got that problem. Now, the way that you're going to do the conversions will vary, but the fact that you have to do them, the fact that it's coming in as a string, that's consistent across all languages.
And and you bring up the point of, like, if you decide to start building websites or forms where users enter data, you made an awesome point. That's right. Typically, when a user enters a value in a text box and you ask for the value of the user typed in, it's going to give you a string. So you're going to have to convert it to a number to do your math. So this is such a common scenario. It's annoying. And you know how we usually find out we have to do it? We run it, we get the error message, and go, oh, yeah, I got to convert that, don't I?
Yep.
So all I have to do in my code, in this case, is I need to say, take the value inside, let's do a float here. Let's take the salary, convert it to a float. Let's take the bonus, convert it to a float. And now it should be taking a numeric value. It takes a string, converts it to a number, takes the other string, converts it to a number. So now I'm adding two numbers instead of two strings. So fingers crossed. Oh, hang on, I was still in the middle. I just did the editing while the code was running. Let's get rid of that breakpoint. I don't want that anymore. I just want to run my code. Please enter my salary, 500. Bonus, 75. 575. Success. So,
but I liked the old math.
You liked the other math, did you?
The old math worked out better.
Christopher would prefer it if we left that bug in the system. But just imagine the disaster it would be at a company. And it's the kind of thing, you might have had it in your code. It was off printing paychecks, and everybody's going, wow, this is great. Everybody at the company is really, really happy. Just because you forgot to convert a data type.
Yeah,
So it's important to test your code, is what I'm saying. Make sure the output is what you think it should be. Just because it runs doesn't necessarily mean it's doing what it's supposed to.
Yep.
Always take the time to say, well, if I type in this, does it give me what I think it should give me back?
Always test it.
Always test your code. It's not just knowing it runs doesn't mean it's doing what it's supposed to. It's really important to test.
Yep.
So in our case, to fix our code, we have used converted to a float instead of just adding salary and bonus, and now we're adding two numbers instead of two strings.
Perfect.
Now, I do want to bring up a little situation of, Christopher, what would you think would happen if somebody typed in a salary of Bob?
Well, it looked like you spelled Bob backwards, but anyway, so, I'm guessing that what would happen is Python would look at it and sort of do what I would do, which is, what do you want me to do with this? Well, it's three letters.
Exactly. So if we go look at the slide here, if somebody types in, I'm going to bring up a highlighter here quickly. So we've asked somebody to enter a value for salary. And then we take that salary value and we've typed in Bob. So salary storing the value Bob. When we get to this line of code and it tries to convert Bob to a float, Python's going to choke. It's just going to go, I don't know what to do with this. And you're going to get some weird, nasty error message spewing all over your screen. So this sort of thing will happen. We are going to look at error handling later in one of the later modules tomorrow. So we will show you how you could handle that gracefully, because I guarantee you someday a user is going to enter something like letters where you only want numbers, and you don't want the code going and spewing nasty error messages to the user just because they accidentally typed a letter. You want to come back and say, excuse me, if you don't mind, could you please enter numbers only?
Pardon me.
We want to be polite to our users, and we don't want things crashing. So we will look at error handling tomorrow, and we'll show you some graceful ways to deal with those types of mistakes that users do things you don't expect, and we got to handle that. So the code would crash. So we've just done a demonstration of showing that data type. So now you have the information you need to complete this challenge.
Okay, so what's our challenge?
Your challenge
today? Should we choose to accept it?
Should you choose to accept it? You are going to create a mortgage calculator. There's a lot of websites that do this online. And we have the formula. Your monthly payment is the loan amount times the interest of 1 plus I times number of payments minus 1. And it's this big, scary formula. But all you need to really know is that the user is going to enter a monthly payment. You're going to calculate a monthly payment. The user is going to enter a loan amount, an interest rate, and number of payments. And with that information, using the formula here, you're going to be able to return to them what their monthly payment would be. So that's your challenge, a very real-world problem. But hey, you may find yourself using this code to calculate how much you can afford to buy that car or that house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic.
So congratulations. You guys have now got the ability to solve mathematical problems using your code.
Start working with the numbers. Excellent. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of hungry.
You guys have been doing well. You've held up so well being here this long. You rock. Now, the good news is we've gotten through the long part of a day. After lunch is the shorter part of a day. We got through 4 this morning. We're only doing 3 this afternoon.
Yep. So what do you say we take a break for a meal?
I like it.
Yep. And we'll be back in about an hour. So we'll see you guys back here in about 60 minutes. 60, about an hour.
See you
so
soon.
We'll see you then.